Welcome to the Podcast Pediatricians' first podcast.
Woohoo!
Finally, I'm Rob Walter.
And I'm Matt Gotthold.
And also welcome to our website, podcastpediatricians.com. That's the word podcast, P-O-D-C-E-S-T, then pediatricians, plural, with no space in between, and then .com. Our first episode will start with pediatric sleep. But first, a little bit about this new podcast. It's co-hosted by two full-time community pediatricians, us, and if we sound a bit unrehearsed, it's because we are. We do not have a lot of free time.
We're truly independent voices. We sign our own paychecks, which is becoming a rarity as hospitals gobble up independent practitioners left and right. We owe no allegiance to any local or national organizations.
Or to ourselves, really.
We owe no allegiance to, you're absolutely right, we owe no allegiance to each other, except for our friendship.
Right.
We're longtime colleagues, more recently friends, and sort of competitors, as our separate group practices overlap into each other's turf. We have combined over 50 years of practicing pediatrics, and we're still learning.
And especially, I like to say, Matt is still learning a lot. I used to be his program director. We'll talk about that later.
This will be evident as time goes on. We're always looking to learn from our patients and our colleagues, from meetings and from journals, no matter how experienced we're becoming. We know that once you get too cocky as a doctor, that's when mistakes start to be made. Much of the pediatric advice in the media is filtered through specialists and hospital-based experts. In our opinion, it rarely comes from those on the front lines like ourselves, who are seeing hundreds of babies and children and teens each week. We hope to fill that void a little bit with some practical advice and with the viewpoint of community pediatric caregivers.
I'm your co-host, Rob Walter. I grew up on Long Island and trained 10 years in Chicago, where I worked hard to drop my thick Long Island accent, and I've practiced in the Brandywine Valley for about 25 years. I have two millennial children in their mid-20s, and I'm now returning to the airways after a 37-year hiatus since my radio sports broadcasting days on WKWZ 88.5 FM rocking Syosset.
Dang, you're old. I grew up in South Jersey, went to college and med school in Pennsylvania, and then I migrated south to Delaware, where my wife and kids and I have lived for the last over 20 years. Been in private practice. I love what I do, and I have no problem incorporating the other things that I love in life aside from medicine, things like music and books and sports, into my practice, and as part of a routine conversation with my patients, their parents, and my staff.
Let's be clear, though. He's from Jersey, and he's from the part of the Jersey, if you saw The Sopranos, where they, in the Pine Barrens, where they dump the bodies. That's kind of Matt's family, people.
Family plot.
His people.
my peeps. And the swamps of Jersey, as Springsteen said.
And as Matt said, we really love being pediatricians, despite insurance dictates, electronic medical records, which I hate more than Matt. Big pharma hassles.
Wait a minute, you hate them more than me, or you hate electronic medical records more than I do?
More than you do, the latter.
Gotcha.
Big pharma hassles, silly 3 a.m. phone calls. It's an honor and privilege to care for children. We take our roles as pediatricians extremely seriously.
But we don't take ourselves very seriously. In fact, we are often sort of idiots when it comes to some of the things that we confront in the office.
Totally
every day.
agree. I agree. Yeah. And we'll highlight clinical issues in pediatric medicine. We hope to appeal to savvy parents and pediatric caregivers of all stripes, family practitioners, pediatric nurse practitioners and nurses, pediatric physician assistants, and of course our fellow pediatricians and pediatric residents and medical students.
Each week we plan to highlight particular pediatric topics, sometimes in multiple parts, and sometimes with follow-up with an expert in the field. This podcast will be done from the point of view of community pediatric caregivers on the front lines, with our prime intention being promoting the best for our patients and their families, and hopefully our listeners. We also plan to cover a range of health issues in the news and new pediatric studies. Hopefully, we'll be able to navigate through the noise to discuss the best ways to care for newborns through the adult age.
Matt's the bigger history buff and will bring some historical perspective for each topic. We often may not agree with each other, and sometimes even ourselves, from week to week, as I find in my office from week to week. But we know that everything is not black and white, and we revel in the gray.
Lots of gray area out there.
And the advice changes over years. For example, we used to routinely recommend syrup of ipecac for accidental ingestions, routine enemas for constipation. I cringe when I think of all the enemas
Maybe
I
you
recommended.
did, man.
Well, back in the day, for severe constipation.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that. I love constipation.
Yikes.
There are many ways to raise healthy, happy children. And certainly, pediatricians themselves are not always the greatest parents.
Yeah, I'm kind of reflecting back on a time when I found my then toddler in his diaper and a pair of boots in six inches of snow wandering around our front yard, which is at that point a major street. And that's only after I looked all over the house for him while I was babysitting.
Okay.
Not my finest moment.
Yeah, I don't know what the statute of limitations for calling DFS, but we'll let you go. I put my child on a tree limb to take a perfect picture on vacation, and as I was looking to frame him, all of a sudden he was gone. And an ER visit later with a few stitches. It was not a fine moment in parenting.
Oh man! However, despite our lack of parenting skills at times, we both belong to and we strongly support the American Academy of Pediatrics, or AAP. But we certainly don't always agree with their positions, as we will discuss on sleep. We strive to keep an open mind. The last part of each episode will hopefully be a little bit of freestyling, covering topics of things that interest us. So, after a short break, we will dive into infant sleep. And we're back. Our disclaimer. We're sharing our own personal opinions on pediatric care. Always talk to your own pediatric caregiver about your child. Pediatric caregivers should always consult expert guidelines and consider their own community standards of care. So in getting back to our topic of sleep, sleep is, as we all know, in many ways related to everything we experience. It affects and it increases the risk of multiple pediatric maladies, including things like obesity, constipation, headaches, and particularly mental health issues. In the very near future, we'll be discussing sleep and its history, but in the meantime, we're going to briefly touch on some controversy involving one of the current recommendations of the Academy of Pediatrics, and Rob is going to segue us into that.
Right. There's a lot of controversies with young infants sleeping. There's the issue of co-sleeping with infants, attachment parenting. Yes, all other primates sleep with their babies, but again, all of them are naked. So there's that. So in my 25 years as being a pediatrician, the single piece of advice I get complimented on most, and yes, Matt, I do get compliments occasionally, but it's teaching good sleep hygiene for their newborns and young infants. And I start talking about sleep for babies really in the first few days of life, the first visit in the office. And we've come a long way since just a generation ago when alcohol and narcotics like paregoric were the norm for helping getting your baby to sleep. Matt, you'll cover this.
I will. I'll cover that. I mean, certainly a little whiskey on the gums was always a big recommendation back in the day.
In Matt's house, in the Gotthold house.
Gotthold's house maybe was a little
more,
more than a little.
Yes.
But any event.
There's always a little bit of Manischewitz wine, especially before that circumcision in the Walter house. So now, my 5 newborn sleep commandments. Yes, it's the 5 sleep commandments. The 5 sleep commandments. All right, Matt, do you have any idea what I'm doing?
No idea.
Okay, that won't be the last time. Okay, the 5 sleep commandments for if you want your baby to sleep through the night by a few months of age. Giving this advice and other advice, I think Matt and I both will rarely claim that anything we say is totally original. We all pick up bits and pieces from others throughout our career.
Yeah, I always claim to be a much better editor than I am a creator, so I'd rather swipe other people's information and make it my own.
Yeah, me too. All right, so number 1, once the baby hits birth weight, never, ever, ever wake the baby up to feed at night. Now, until they hit birth weight in the first week or 2, don't let them sleep more than like 4 hours because they need to get the weight. But after that, never wake them up to feed. And during the day for newborns, don't let them nap more than 2.5 to 3 hours in a row ever. You do not want to have long daytime naps. Number 2, have natural sunlight in the room during the daytime naps so the babies can get a circadian rhythm. It always will be naturally darker at night. Eventually, often after solids are started with a lunch, the last daytime nap will be after that lunch and done by 3 or 3:30 p.m., the post-lunch siesta. Number 3, I never have a fixed rule on how long to let a baby cry. There's crying and there's screaming bloody murder. And mom should decide if she needs to pick up her baby. You cannot spoil a newborn.
This is true. I mean, for the first couple weeks to couple months, if your baby's crying, obviously comforting your baby should be a priority for you. But as the babies get a bit older and people ask us, how long should I let my baby cry? That timeline is more based on you as an adult. The baby really has no concept of time the way we understand it. So 5 minutes or 15 minutes probably doesn't make a huge difference in a baby's experience. What it makes a difference is in the parent's experience.
Absolutely. And note also, when I keep talking about mom, when I say that, I really mean mom or dad. But honestly, usually it is mom dealing with the newborns. And historically, dads can be kind of clueless with newborns, although over the last 20 years, I've seen that change quite a bit. How about you?
Yeah, for sure. Dads are definitely more involved. I certainly have a handful of dads in my practice who are stay-at-home dads now, and it's refreshing.
It is. And 2 dads. It really has been great to see the sharing. But having said that, it's usually mom. Number 4, as the weeks to months go by, try to put your baby down sleepy but a little awake. As they learn to fuss themselves to sleep, they get much closer to sleeping longer. When the baby wakes up briefly during the night, a few hours after falling asleep, everything should look exactly the same as when she last remembered being awake. This is by far the key rule.
Yeah, and we'll be getting into a little bit more of this as we discuss infancy and sleep. But what I usually try to reiterate to parents is the last thing you want to become is the tool to put your baby asleep. You do not want to put yourself in a position where the baby isn't able to settle themselves. And many people find themselves either rocking their baby to sleep, feeding their baby to sleep, or holding their baby to sleep. And of course, when a baby wakes up, as is part of their normal sleep cycle, to kind of come back up to the surface, what they're really looking for is the recreation of the exact same environment that they experienced when they initially went to sleep. So Rob's point is well taken.
Whoa, thanks, Matt. All right, number 5.
Don't expect a lot of that in the future.
Number 5, as the weeks and months go by, every inch further away the baby is from the parent's bed will reduce the time to when the baby eventually sleeps through most of the night. The babies can smell the parents, and the parents can hear every baby burp and fart and hiccup. So that's another key rule to gradually get the baby farther and farther from the parent's bed. That's my 5 sleep commandments. If these commandments are followed, I rarely see sleep issues in later infancy. But this is all the parent's choice. If they choose to rock baby Haley to sleep every night in their arms, or have her right next to them in her crib against their bed for a year, the baby will do just fine, but the parents usually will be sleep deprived for a good while. Now, to reduce SIDS, the AAP recommends that the babies always sleep in the supine position until they can turn themselves over, that there are no crib bumpers or blankets in the crib or other toys for the first year, that regulation mattresses used and regulation cribs, and specifically babies should never sleep on a couch. Totally agree. We all totally agree. Also, never to co-sleep with the baby, but I certainly have parents who choose to co-sleep, whether it's cultural, for many generations, like most of my patients from South Asia, from India, that they've been doing it for generations, and the grandparents in the room, and they've been doing it for generations, or my Japanese families who do it till like 4 or 5 years of age, or even part of attachment parenting, like Blossom from the Big Bang Theory.
Whoa. Blossom's not from the Big Bang Theory.
Well, Bialik, whatever her name is, but she's Blossom, and she's on the Big Bang Theory, and she's into the attachment parenting. That's all I'm saying.
I think I follow you.
Yeah. So if parents choose to co-sleep with their baby, I'm not going to go start arguing with them about it too much. I just let them know what the AP guidelines are, and then I try to make it as safe as possible. I also let them know that if they do that, their babies probably won't sleep through the night for quite a while, although occasionally, with all that, they do, and more power to them. Now, the new AAP guidelines to reduce SIDS that came out in October of 2016 reiterated the supine position, the sleep service, avoiding positioning devices, pacifier use, tummy time while awake, all to reduce the risk of SIDS, which, again, we all agree with. But then they recommended that all infants stay in the parents' room for at least 6, but preferably for 12 months. Ah! It just blew out our mixer. All right, we don't agree with this new room sharing recommendation. We immediately both disagree with the AAP on this the day it came out, and that's pretty rare. And we've been chomping at the bit to refute it and join some of our pediatric colleagues like William Wilkoff in Maine, who is quite a legend in pediatrics. And Matt even had lunch with him or something.
I did. I was able to meet him a few years ago through a colleague who worked in his practice. It was a very cool guy. Very nice lunch.
You just showed up and I don't know. I imagine that you're
invite.
Kind of shifty looking, like, oh, I have a pediatrician, let's have lunch.
It was still like it was a spiritual experience, that's for sure.
Good. This new recommendation, let's look at the science. So I'm going to try to imitate a podcast I kind of like called Science Versus, hosted by someone named Wendy Zuckerman, who has this really sexy Australian accent that I can't reproduce. But her voice really doesn't sound like what I would think Wendy Zuckerman's voice would sound like. I also want to give a shout out to Dr. Aaron Carroll, a pediatrician from Indiana University, go Big Ten, who writes for the New York Times, and he co-wrote an article on the Upshot in the New York Times with Claire Miller, which gave great info on the science of the recommendation of room sharing. So in 2011, the AAP was kind of wishy-washy on room sharing. And now in 2016, all of a sudden, they're taking a strong and I think wrong-headed position based on 4 citations, all from studies mostly in the 1990s. So really nothing new since 2011. The first citation they gave is from an old Norwegian book that's out of print, so we're just going to ignore it. That's good science, right, Matt? No one could find it.
Something that's out of print.
No one could find it. We had to ignore it. Okay.
Yeah.
Then, as this New York Times article pointed out, the other 3 articles are case control studies, which are not very strong scientific types of studies, but kind of the best you can do with the limitations on SIDS research. These kind of studies show associations and can have inherent bias. Okay, so I got copies of these 3 articles that were cited by the AAP for their room sharing for 12-month recommendation. So the first article is from the British Medical Journal and looked and studied babies from 1993 to 1995 born in England. The AAP only started recommending babies sleep on their backs in 1992 to reduce SIDS, and even if they started recommending that a bit earlier in Europe, it still seems flawed to use data from the 90s, over 20 years ago, before the single biggest factor in reducing SIDS, supine sleeping, was universally ingrained for our parents. Plus, most European families routinely do sleep in the same room as their baby until a year, which is very different from what most families do here in the United States.
Yeah, so it's not really the cultural norm, beyond the first several months or so here.
Now, the second article cited was from The Lancet, another wonderful scientific journal, and also studied babies from 1992 to 1997 from all over Europe. And they report similar findings, but again, I have issues with sleep positioning and also the fact that, again, Europeans routinely stay in the same room anyway, unlike in the United States. The third and last article was the only U.S. article in the Journal of Pediatrics. It doesn't make it better because the Lancet and BMJ are wonderful, but it's the only one published in the U.S. And it was published in 2005, but it studied babies in Scotland from 1996 to 2000. So again, mostly in the 1990s. Now, amazingly, this last of the 3 papers found that lack of room sharing was not associated at all with SIDS risks for the baby unless the parents smoked. And in my practice, it's rare to have the parents smoke. How about you, Matt?
Yeah, no, not many parents that we have in our practice currently who are active smokers.
Exactly. So, to recap, the AAP recommended baby room sharing until 1 year of age based on old data in the 90s that seems a bit flawed, and that one of them, the latest one, doesn't even support having room sharing to reduce SIDS risk. But also, as Dr. Carroll and his colleagues pointed out in that New York Times article, these studies do not take into account the potential costs of parental sleep deprivation from having the baby in the parent's room until 1 year of age. This includes, but is not limited to, motor vehicle accidents by the parents who are sleep deprived.
Plus, as we talk about things that are recommendations, the majority of the recommendations are generated by a premise of what is the safest. And I think this is where at least I would like to draw the line. There's a difference between safety and there's a difference between safety as it pertains to health. And so, what we really are trying to achieve in our practices as we discuss these topics with parents on a daily basis is not just what's the safest practice, but what's the healthiest practice. And so, for argument's sake, one could say that the best way to get your baby to daycare is to bubble wrap them and put them in a Brinks truck and make sure that the truck drives at 5 miles an hour. That's probably the safest way to get to your baby's daycare. However, this is not a practical way to approach this. And so when we look at this bigger topic of having a baby continue to sleep in a parent's room, what it fails to recognize is the fact that this affects a myriad of aspects of family's health. It affects certainly the practical aspects of the parent's sleep patterns. It certainly affects the aspect of the baby being more needy in terms of waking in the middle of the night for their parents' attention. And it affects things just as basic as, oh golly, we're sleep deprived and perhaps our breakfast won't be as healthy, tomorrow morning. So this is why Rob and I take exception to some of these broad-based recommendations. Yes, indeed, safety is a huge consideration for us, but I think we have to take one step above that and say, but what is the healthiest way to address the situation?
Right. And on top of that, again, we'll add that the data doesn't really even support it, in my opinion, either in this case.
Righto. So I think what we'll find is that although we discuss these types of topics with parents in our practice every day, including the current one, that doesn't necessarily mean that we will always agree with these recommendations. To agree with these is sometimes to invalidate what really is a practical and healthy approach by parents. And we are hoping to serve as that conduit to try to sort through some of this noise as it pertains to some of the recommendations that parents hear about on their 5-minute news blurb or see on their social media. It would appear that this current recommendation is going to hopefully go the way of a lot of the other AAP guidelines that have been issued over the years and then reconsidered in the greater context. Things like screen times for children under 2 years old, things like circumcision and whether or not that's the most advantageous way to approach a newborn boy's
foreskin.
Genitalia. Yeah.
Foreskin.
The fact that we have waffled from one extreme to the other over our recommendations in terms of peanut butter until very recently it was waiting until the age of 2 or even 3 in some communities. And now the most recent recommendations are to have your child consume peanut butter as peanut substance that's acceptable as early as 4 to 6 months old. We go through these types of things. I mean, geez, Rob, for a while, croup was not addressed with the common use of using an anti-inflammatory, a steroid to provide some relief for the kids who had significant croup. And so, as time goes on, we change our perspective on things. I'm hoping that's going to be the way that we look at this most current recommendation.
I absolutely think that we'll be talking about 5 years from now. Yeah, we got rid of that AAP rule.
After a break, we will scintillate you or bore you with our personal interests and a few pearls in our endorsements. Or you can just go ahead and skip the episode 2, where we pick back up on sleep.
Yep.
Okay, here are some things that interest us. Like books.
We started a book club for men last year, not to be confused with hair club for men.
Because we don't need that.
I don't need that, definitely.
I'm beginning to need that.
Yeah. And it's Pediatricians, homicide, defense
Oh, we've got a defense attorney in there just so we can, we can include the law.
Our first book was Boys in the Boat, which kind of has sports. It's got depression. It's got Nazis. We did The Professional, which is kind of this kind of obscure but wonderful book about boxing that weirdly Amy Schumer cited as one of her favorite books. And then
Amy
Matt's, Matt's
my personal favorite was 100 Years of Solitude, which didn't go over so well with the rest of the gang.
Yeah, the magical fiction. I mean, and it is like a famous book, and I'm glad I read
Gabriel
it.
Garcia Marquez, man.
Oh, my God. Jose Arcadio, Remedio, Aureliano, and 15 other people.
Got no imagination. What was the other one we did? We did In Cold Blood. Truman Capote.
Cold Blood.
Yeah. Well, what we try to do is we read books that none of us have read before, but that perhaps we should have.
Right.
So yeah, that one was fun.
And luckily, then we get together at a gastro club
way.
and talk about it, and hopefully no one's recording our conversation because it's really not the most intellectual.
It's not for public consumption.
Book. But Matt has all these tabs in his books.
Oh yeah.
So he takes copious notes that we don't
that everyone ignores
use at all.
Yeah.
I haven't cracked Matt's poker game yet, because that's only for his really close friends.
I keep telling Rob we're waiting for an open seat. Most of my friends are on the younger side, and there does have to be a demise prior to joining the group.
The whole second table. There needs to be a second table that your father-in-law has to give you or something. Yeah, that's been for a year. Music. So music, I have to admit, is Matt's specialty, but I will bravely argue the merits of Billy Joel over Bruce Springsteen as he mocks me.
Bruce can kick Billy's butt.
Oh, no. We'll talk about it. We did pick the show title music together, though I wanted Dr. Robert from Revolver, but was voted down because it was kind of too druggy, and we're certainly not that. My second choice was Ooga Chaka, Hooked on a Feeling, but that probably would cost a lot to license. So
yeah, I claimed musical knowledge and taste superiority there.
I don't have taste.
After all, Rob does like Billy Joel.
Okay. Now, Broadway music is definitely not Matt's thing, and there'll be many Hamilton references that he won't even begin to understand. I won't touch on the epic Dear Evan Hansen yet, but also Avenue Q will be brought up. We also love movies, and no one has watched more TV in the last century than me, which is both, I guess, I'm both proud and extremely embarrassed.
As well, you should be.
Pediatrician.
We share a passion for podcasts, and this ranges everywhere from This American Life to Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. I'm a personal fan of multiple podcasts. Specifically, really dig Tim Ferriss. There's a newer podcast I've been listening to lately called The Knowledge Podcast. Love You Bet Your Garden, and even This Is Your Life with Michael Hyatt. All in strong play on my phone.
I got to go back to my first podcast I ever listened to, and it's still the best, the greatest. It's This American Life with Ira Glass. Everything from Pasta Batman to the Holocaust bracelet, the big pile of money. For a week there, I did understand what credit default swaps meant. I don't anymore. Chicago gangs, integrated schools in Connecticut, Tell Me I'm Fat, David Sedaris, Mike Birbiglia, David Rakoff. The Gilmore Girls recently on the Christmas show. I actually then watched the pilot with my daughter, which is embarrassing, and didn't kind of liked it, which is really more embarrassing. Anyway, we'll talk about podcasts. Rants. We love a good rant, and we'll sprinkle them throughout the regular episodes and also in special rant editions.
And we don't just like to rant ourselves. We like to rant back against ranters, and so we'll certainly be experiencing some of that as we go on with our podcast. What we're hoping to do is actively engage you, our fellow caregivers and parents, on podcastpediatricians.com with your feedback about episodes, pediatric pearls, even sharing some of the mistakes and embarrassing moments that we pediatric caregivers have stumbled across over our years. And we can share these with everybody. We seem to have quite a few that we can at least start the ball rolling with.
I love talking about embarrassing moments and mistakes because I've had so many. I feel like you don't remember the good. You don't remember the good things you do. Sometimes you just remember the mistakes you make. But that's how you learn. I will throw in one quick pearl to begin with. This is just a simple one. Just for any of you out there, you probably know this already. But when you're looking at a throat in a kid or a teen, And the classic thing is say ah. Tell them to say eh with an E, not ah, because it raises the soft palate and you can see everything much better. Shout out to Renee K, who gave me that pearl. And it works. You can use that the next day in your office. Just say not ah. What do you do, Matt? What do you tell them to say?
I go.
You don't even do throat cultures,
I try.
Right? You're like one of those urgent care centers who just look at it and say, "You look like you have strep," so you give antibiotics.
It's a skill set, Rob, and it's one that I'm trying to teach you. No, we are absolutely more than in favor of culturing and rapid strep testing. Everything in our office, and hold great disdain for those who do not. So as we move through the various things like pearls, things like our sidebar interests. We're also managed to throw in a few things about our home state of Delaware.
Yeah, we are not just Wayne's World.
No, Wayne's World.
We're pools and schools, not just Wayne World, but it's always fun to throw a few little Delaware nuggets in there.
Hey, so, Wayne's World, they're about to have a 25th anniversary showing of the movie at various theaters. More push for Delaware, as if Joe Biden wasn't enough. This is really going to bring us to the forefront of American culture.
One of the finest movies ever made. So, after the break, we'll be back.
So we haven't even tried to find sponsors, but we're lucky enough not to be in need of the sponsorship money, at least not for the time being. So we'll just plug random things that we like for the foreseeable future. If and when we do decide on sponsors, what we'll do is donate a significant chunk of any revenue there to pediatric charities. Also, none of the products or none of the things that we mention as things that we endorse necessarily want to be associated with this podcast. So don't blame them for us endorsing them.
Exactly. So our first thing I'm going to mention, big plug, you don't really see this plug very much, I think, is blueberries. Now, we're both big opponents of fresh produce, and we'll talk about that later episodes and have some programs for our patients. But I've been kind of obsessed with blueberries for years, that I have to have enough so that I know what times of the year they're really expensive and what time of the year they're not. Have it on cereal. I have them just for snacks. I had some kidney stones a few years ago, and I read that blueberries can help prevent them. And then like a year later, I read that they may help cause them. I have no idea, but still eat them. Just one of nature's perfect food. What's another thing, Matt?
One of the things that I have found to be incredibly useful for myself, I tend not to be very organized, and so as a consequence of that, I am forever losing things, and most particularly the things that I seem to need the most. Things like my car keys, things like my wallet, things like my phone. And so a couple of years ago, I had found as a prototype in a magazine a little device called a tile. Tiles are essentially GPS locators, and so as long as you're within a certain range, you can activate your phone app, and it will start your tile beeping. And so these things come with holes in them for keys securing. They come in a thinner version to slide into your wallet. And the other interesting thing is that if other people have this app on their phone, that actually acts as kind of an outpost. So although there's only a limited range to the tiles within your current environment, if somebody near your tile, if you've left it somewhere, it will show you, where indeed that tile is.
Didn't you lose your wallet in
Which time?
This street?
Many times. And the newer version of Tile actually will allow you to activate the individual tiles, and it kind of backfeeds then to your phone. So you can find your phone if indeed you have your car keys. So it's rare that I lose more than one of these essential parts of my life. So usually as long as I have one of them, I can find the others, which has been a real boon to my existence.
And because of Matt, I did get the Tile 2 for my wallet and my keys, and it is the kind that you press on it and you can press on your keys and find your wallet. The one thing I've read about, hasn't happened yet, is that the batteries don't always last as long as you would like.
No,
but
you do have to
that's how they make money.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. They advise you, I think, to replace them on a yearly basis, and it's not crazy expensive. It's not cheap. It's not crazy expensive. I think one tile will run you about $20-$25, and for me, $25 worth of soothing or assuaging my sense of having lost something acutely that I need speed is well worth it.
And I don't know about you, but I've been losing stuff since I was like 10. Like
I
mean, so when dementia hits me, I feel like it's not going to be noticeable for a long time. It's like, yeah, he loses things all the time. He pauses mid-sentence and forgets what he's going to say. My patients are used to that.
Right.
So one last thing is another app that's a podcast app that you can get is something called Calm. And Calm is an app that is for mindfulness. I wouldn't say it's, and I guess meditation also, but it's got all these different choices. And both Matt and I, me more, have some sleep insomnia type issues and occasional anxiety issues. And Matt actually turned me on to this Calm application, but it really is a nice choice of things, whether it's for sleep or just during the day, to guide you through some 5-10 minute mindfulness. I'm not really big into meditation per se, but I've also really liked that app.
Yeah, it's a fantastic app. There are several others out there like it. Headspace is one. I know that there are at least a few others, various social media and podcasts. Calm is my favorite, though. I think what I'm really fond of is, to be honest with you, the voice of the narrator. Her name is Tamara Levitt, and she really does a very wonderful job of soothing one's overall being as you listen to her.
You know the name of the voice.
I did.
Of
You
the
know
woman?
what? I told you when I get into something,
really
I go
weird.
deep
All right.
six on it.
Okay. I did not know
But as Rob had mentioned, there are various kind of guided meditations that are available on this app. There's a free version and there's a paid for version. I think the paid for version is, I don't know, about $30 a year. And for me, 10 cents a day of peace of mind for maybe 10 or 15 minutes is more than worth it.
All right, there you go. Our unpaid and unsolicited recommendations. So that does it for our first episode of Podcast Pediatricians. And again, check out podcastpediatricians.com. We may need to work on our time management skills a little bit, although I think we both agree we're better than Andy Reid at that.
Google Andy Reid if you don't know what we're talking about.
Matt's like, no one will get that.
That's REID.
Okay. We like that. So one last nugget for our listeners on our first podcast. So if you remember Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, I'm not talking about Eddie Murphy's Mr. Robinson's Neighborhood, but Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Remember, it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, a neighborly day in this beauty, or something like that. Would you be mine? Mm-hmm. Come on, sing it. Could you be mine? Okay, so now, if you're listening to my voice, so now immediately Google Mr. Rogers and Tall Man, Tall Man, Man, and you will get a video. And this video clip always, always, always makes me crack up. It was such an innocent time back then. And I want to thank the Biotrunk family for this little nugget.
So as we're wrapping things up, we hope to have you join us again for our upcoming episodes. In the near future, we'll be dealing further with sleep, including its cultural and social history, get a little bit into some basic science of sleep, and then delving further into sleep and the issues involved with infants and children and teenagers, and even start to maybe rant a bit. I know that Dr. Walter
Chomping
here has a big rant that he's been chewing on for a while and really wants to emote that as effectively as he can to our listening audience.
All right. Well, thanks again for listening, and we're going to keep getting better, I hope.
We promise.
we do. Have a great day. Bye.
Ooga shaka, ooga, ooga, ooga shaka, ooga, ooga, ooga shaka, ooga, ooga, ooga shaka, ooga, ooga.
Podcast Pediatricians Productions. All rights reserved.